My dear garden-loving friends, let me ask you something. How much did you spend at the garden center this spring? $50? $100? More? And here's the real question. How much of that money will you need to spend again next year? All of it. Every single dollar. Because those beautiful annuals you planted are already on borrowed time. They're designed to bloom, fade, and disappear forever. But what if I told you there's a way to plant once and enjoy decades of beauty? What if your garden could actually save you money while getting more gorgeous every single year? You know the routine. Every spring, you load up that cart at the garden center. Flats of petunias stacked high, trays of impatiens in every color, maybe some marigolds for the vegetable bed. Your credit card comes out and you tell yourself it's not that bad, just part of having a beautiful yard, right? Well, let's talk about what that ritual actually costs you. There's the sticker price, sure, but then there's the gas to drive there, the time spent wandering the aisles, the potting soil you need to buy because your beds are depleted from last year, the fertilizer those heavy feeders demand every few weeks. And when half of those petunias struggle in that one spot that gets too much sun, you're back at the store buying replacements by mid-June. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. Take that typical spring shopping trip. Let's say you spend $75. Multiply that by 10 years. You're at $750 already. Now add the water bills from keeping those shallow-rooted plants alive through summer heat. Add the liquid fertilizer you're buying every month. Add those replacement plants. Add the raised water bill from daily watering. You're easily over $1,000 for a single modest flower bed over a decade. Let me show you the real numbers. A typical flower bed planted with annuals costs about $200 per season when you factor in plants, soil amendments, fertilizer, and water. Do that for 10 years and you've spent $2,000. Now compare that to spending $300 once on perennials. Just once. Those perennials not only survive, they multiply. That $300 investment turns into hundreds of plants you'll divide and spread throughout your garden without spending another cent. And it's not just your wallet that pays the price. Think about your body. Every spring, you're down on your knees digging out the old dead plants. You're hauling bags of potting soil from the car. You're bending and planting and watering and fussing, year after year. When your back isn't what it used to be, when your knees protest every time you kneel, when gardening starts feeling like punishment instead of pleasure, here's what the garden centers don't advertise. Annuals are bred to die. That's their entire purpose. They're programmed to bloom fast and hard, pouring every ounce of energy into flowers and seeds, then collapse. They're designed to bring you back to the store next spring. It's a subscription service for your garden, and you're locked into paying it every single year. Perennials work differently. They invest in survival. They build strong root systems. They store energy for winter. They come back stronger each spring. A perennial in its third year is twice the size it was when you planted it. By year 5, it's a showstopper. By year 10, it's a mature specimen that looks like it cost hundreds of dollars at a specialty nursery. So why does buying annuals every spring cost you thousands more over 10 years than choosing perennials once? Because you're paying a subscription fee for temporary beauty instead of making a one-time investment in permanent abundance. You're renting your garden instead of owning it. You're working harder every year to maintain the same level of beauty when you could be watching that beauty multiply on its own. The money you save is just the beginning. There's something even more valuable that perennials offer, something that happens underground where you can't see it, something that transforms not just your garden's appearance, but its very ability to survive and thrive. Because what happens beneath the soil changes everything about how your garden survives. While you're admiring those petunias blooming on the surface, something critical is missing 6 inches down, something that will cost you dearly come July when the heat arrives and the water bill starts climbing. Annual plants have shallow root systems. We're talking 3 to 6 inches deep at most. That's it. They're designed to live fast and die young, so they never bother building the kind of root structure that would help them survive long term. Those roots spread out wide but stay near the surface, which means they're completely dependent on you to keep that top layer of soil moist. Now think about what happens during a heat wave. The sun bakes that top few inches of soil dry within hours. Those shallow roots have nowhere to go, no reserves to tap into, no access to the deeper moisture that stays cool and damp even during a drought. Miss a day of watering, and those annuals start wilting. Miss 2 days and they're stressed. Miss 3 and you're looking at permanent damage or dead plants that need replacing. Perennials work completely differently underground. Their roots plunge deep into the earth, 12 inches, 18 inches. Some varieties send roots down 2 feet or more. They're building infrastructure down there, creating their own water highway that reaches moisture you didn't even know existed in your soil. Think of it like this. Annual roots are like drinking from a shallow saucer. One hot day, and that saucer is empty. Perennial roots are like having a straw that reaches all the way down to a deep reservoir. Even when the surface is bone dry, those roots are pulling up water from depths where the soil stays consistently moist. Your plants can go weeks without rain and still look fresh because they've tapped into reserves that shallow roots never touch. But here's where it gets really valuable. Those deep perennial roots are doing more than just finding water. They're breaking up compacted soil as they grow, creating channels that let water and air flow deeper into your beds, building structure that improves your entire garden year after year. Hard clay soil that used to shed water like a roof, those perennial roots work through it, loosening it, making it more friable and workable. Sandy soil that dried out too fast, the roots add organic matter as older roots die and decompose, helping that sand hold moisture better. So how do perennial root systems create a self-watering garden that survives droughts better than any annual? By establishing deep underground networks that tap into moisture reserves and create permanent infrastructure that makes your entire garden more resilient. You're not just planting flowers, you're installing a living water management system that gets more efficient every single year. Once those perennials are established, usually by their second or third season, they need watering only during extreme drought. We're talking weeks without rain. Meanwhile, those annuals are demanding attention every single day once summer heat arrives. You're out there with the hose or dragging sprinklers around, watching your water bill climb, all to keep plants alive that were never meant to last anyway. Here's what this means for your daily life. Fewer hours standing in the sun with a hose. Less worry when you want to visit the grandkids for a week in summer. No more rushing home from errands because you forgot to water that morning. You can actually leave for a vacation without begging a neighbor to come water every day or coming home to a garden full of crispy brown stems. Your garden becomes something that supports your life instead of demanding constant sacrifice from it. And here's where it gets even better. Because these permanent roots are just the foundation for a garden that practically manages itself. Remember those infomercials promising appliances you could just set and forget? The rotisserie chicken maker, the slow cooker, the bread machine. Well, perennials actually deliver on that promise in ways no kitchen gadget ever could. Let's talk about what low maintenance truly means when you plant perennials. No replanting every spring. No starting from scratch after frost kills everything. No racing to get plants in the ground before it's too late. No worrying about hardening off tender seedlings or watching the forecast for that last surprise cold snap. You plant once, and that plant becomes a permanent resident of your garden. Now I know what some of you are thinking. Doesn't perennial just mean more work because they're permanent? Don't you have to constantly prune and fuss over them? Aren't they demanding in ways that annuals aren't? Here's the actual maintenance calendar for most perennials. One spring cleanup where you cut back the old dead stems from last year. That's maybe 20 minutes per bed. Then occasional deadheading through the season if you want to extend blooms or keep things tidy. But even that's optional with many varieties. One fall cutback after frost, or you can leave the stems standing for winter interest and bird habitat. Done. That's your entire year. Compare that to the annual treadmill. You're buying plants every spring, hardening them off if you started from seed, planting them, which means preparing the soil all over again, fertilizing them weekly because they're heavy feeders trying to cram an entire life cycle into 4 months, deadheading constantly because spent blooms signal the plant to stop flowering and make seeds, watering daily once summer heat arrives, then ripping everything out in fall, disposing of all that dead plant material, and starting over from bare soil next spring. Here's something most gardeners don't realize. Many perennials actually get better with neglect once they're established. Russian sage thrives on dry conditions and poor soil. Coneflowers bloom more profusely when you ignore them than when you fuss over them. Daylilies laugh at neglect and keep multiplying year after year. These plants evolved to survive without human intervention. They don't need you hovering over them with fertilizer and pruning shears. This is gardening that respects your energy, your time, and your body's limits. You're not down on your knees every weekend. You're not hauling bags and bending and digging season after season. You plant thoughtfully once, let those plants establish, and then step back and watch them thrive. Meanwhile, your neighbors are still loading up carts at the garden center every May, and your yard looks better than theirs. What makes perennials the ultimate set-it-and-forget-it garden investment that keeps giving back? They require a fraction of the ongoing labor while multiplying in size and beauty each year. transforming your garden from a demanding chore into a self-sustaining source of joy. You're trading constant maintenance for occasional light tidying. You're swapping weekly tasks for annual tasks. You're choosing plants that reward minimal effort with maximum impact. Here's the part that really seals the deal. Annuals look their best the day you plant them. They're full, lush, covered in blooms at the nursery because they've been force-fed fertilizer and grown under perfect conditions. You bring them home and they maintain that look for a while, then they start declining. By late summer, they're leggy and tired. Perennials work the opposite way. They look modest that first year because they're investing energy underground. Year 2, they're bigger and bloom better. Year 3, they're impressive. Year 5, they're spectacular specimens that look like mature landscape plants worth serious money. They improve with time instead of declining. But wait until you hear about the most remarkable perennial magic of all. The one that turns your initial investment into an endless supply. What if I told you that 3 years from now, you could have 50 plants from the 5 you bought today without spending another cent? Not a single trip to the garden center, not $1 out of your pocket, just one simple technique that turns every perennial into a renewable resource. Perennials don't just survive year after year. They expand, they multiply, they grow so vigorously that they actually need to be divided to stay healthy. And when you divide them, you're creating brand new plants that are identical to the parent. Free plants that you can use to fill empty spaces, gift to friends, or trade with neighbors. Here's what most gardeners don't realize. When you look at that massive hosta clump that's been in your garden for 3 years, you're not looking at one plant anymore. You're looking at 5 plants, maybe 10, all crowded together waiting to be separated. Those daylilies that have gotten so thick they're barely blooming, that's not a problem. That's a gold mine. Each of those crowded clumps is begging to be divided into multiple healthy plants. The process is wonderfully simple. You dig up an established clump in spring or fall when the weather is cool. Get your shovel or garden fork under the roots and lift the whole thing out. Then you gently pull the clump apart with your hands, or use a knife or spade to cut it into sections. Each section needs some roots and some shoots. That's it. Those are your new plants. You replant them with proper spacing, water them in, and watch them establish. Let's talk about the financial side of this. You buy one hosta for $15. 3 years later, you divide it into 5 plants. You just created $75 worth of hostas. Those 5 plants grow for 3 more years. Now you have 25 plants. That's nearly $400 worth of hostas from one initial $15 purchase. And hostas aren't unusual. Most perennials work exactly this way. This is how you fill your own beds without spending a fortune. This is how you create thoughtful gifts for friends who admire your garden. This is how you build connections with neighbors who want to trade divisions. You've got extra bee balm. They've got extra coneflowers. You swap divisions and both gardens get more diverse without anyone spending money. Some perennials practically beg to be divided every few years. Daylilies become so crowded they stop blooming well, which is their way of telling you it's time to split them up. Hostas develop a dead center when the clump gets too old and thick. Division rejuvenates them. Coneflowers spread enthusiastically and give you dozens of volunteers you can transplant. Bee balm expands so aggressively that you'll be giving away divisions just to keep it under control. Shasta daisies bloom better after division and give you armloads of new plants every 3 to 4 years. How do you divide and multiply your perennials to create an endless supply of free plants? By learning the simple technique of splitting established clumps, you transform each plant into a renewable resource that expands your garden and your gardening community without additional cost. You're turning every perennial into a living investment that pays dividends year after year. Timing matters for success. Divide in spring when new growth is just emerging, or in early fall when temperatures cool down. Don't divide when plants are actively blooming because you'll stress them too much. Water the plant thoroughly the day before you plan to divide it. The moist soil makes digging easier and protects the roots. Choose a cloudy day if possible. The reduced sun stress helps those divisions settle in without wilting. Now that you understand the why and the how, let's talk about which specific perennials will become your garden's permanent backbone. Here's the moment you've been waiting for. The actual plants that will anchor your garden for the next 20 years and beyond. We're not making a shopping list here. We're building a permanent collection. These are the workhorses that will define your landscape for decades. The plants you'll install once and watch transform your yard year after year, while your neighbors keep keep buying the same annuals every spring. Let's start with your foundation plants. Hostas for any shady spot in your garden. These beauties last 30 years or more. I've seen hostas that were planted when Kennedy was president, still thriving and gorgeous. They divide into hundreds of plants over their lifetime. One hosta becomes 5, then 25, then more than you can count. Daylilies for sunny areas. They bloom for weeks, tolerate drought, heat, poor soil, and neglect better than almost any plant I know. You can grow them in pure clay or sand, and they'll still perform. Coneflowers that feed every pollinator in your neighborhood. They bloom all summer long. They drop seeds that turn into baby plants. They multiply themselves without any help from you. Now let's add your structure layer. Russian sage gives you silvery foliage and purple blooms that handle drought like champions. Once established, this plant laughs at dry conditions. Ornamental grasses like switchgrass provide year-round interest with movement and texture. They need zero maintenance beyond one spring haircut. Salvia pumps out blooms non-stop from June until frost. Hummingbirds will camp out in your yard just for the salvia. Here's your seasonal strategy for continuous blooms. Early spring belongs to peonies. These plants live 100 years. You can plant a peony for your grandchildren to enjoy. They bloom in late spring with flowers the size of softballs, then provide handsome foliage all summer. For summer performance, bee balm and black-eyed Susans carry the show. Bee balm spreads enthusiastically and attracts every beneficial insect within miles. Black-eyed Susans bloom for months and seed themselves around your garden. When fall arrives and everyone else's garden looks tired, your asters and sedum will be hitting their stride with gorgeous blooms that last until hard frost. Now for the practical side. Choose native varieties whenever possible. Native plants evolved in your climate. They handle your weather extremes, your soil conditions, and your local pests without needing help. Check your hardiness zone and match plants to your actual conditions. A plant rated for Zone 5 won't be happy in Zone 8. Plan for mature size when you're spacing plants. That little hosta might be 6 inches across now, but it'll be 3 feet wide in 5 years. Let me be honest about the patience factor. There's an old saying among gardeners: year 1 they sleep, year 2 they creep, year 3 they leap. Your perennials spend that first year establishing roots underground. They might bloom a little, but they won't look like much. Year 2, you'll see more growth and better blooms. Year 3 is when the magic happens. Suddenly, that modest plant is a showstopper. And that leap lasts for decades. You can blend approaches while your perennials establish. Use these permanent plants as your backbone. Then tuck in a few annuals if you want to experiment with color or fill gaps. As your perennials mature and spread, you'll need fewer and fewer annuals until eventually you don't need them at all. Start with 5 to 7 proven varieties rather than trying everything at once. Master these plants. Learn how they grow in your specific garden. Then expand as you divide and multiply them. You'll have plenty of material to fill new areas without spending more money. As we wrap up our journey from the annual subscription trap to perennial freedom, I want you to see what this really means for your future. 3 years from now, you'll walk past the garden center in spring. You'll see people loading carts with annuals, and you'll smile knowing your garden is already blooming at home, fuller and more beautiful than ever, without you spending a dime or straining your back. Start small this season. Choose just 3 perennials from our list. Plant them properly, and watch them become the foundation of your forever garden. Drop a comment telling me which perennials you're most excited to try. Hit that subscribe button because we're building a community of gardeners who work smarter, not harder. Your garden should get easier and more beautiful as you get older, not the other way around.